December 1942, above the vast, sparkling expanse of the Solomon Islands. 19-year-old waist gunner Eddie Kowalsski gripped his Browning M2 tightly, every vibration traveling up his arms like a relentless jackhammer. The roar of the aircraft around him was deafening, mixed with the hiss of wind and the distant thump of bombs below. A Japanese Zero suddenly flashed across his vision, sleek and deadly, cutting through the clouds, perhaps 300 yards away. Eddie's heart hammered in rhythm with the gun's recoil. Instinct, sharpened by months of training and fear, took over. He placed the crosshairs squarely on the fighter and squeezed the trigger. 50 rounds tore through the air with a scream, each one a potential lifeline or a wasted chance. But every single bullet passed harmlessly behind the Zero. The enemy pilot didn't even flinch, banking and weaving effortlessly through the sky. Eddie's mind raced. This wasn't his fault. It wasn't a lack of courage or skill. Across the Pacific and Atlantic theaters, the same story unfolded again and again. By 1943, the Army Air Force had reviewed gun camera footage with a cold, unforgiving precision. The results were devastating. Trained gunners hit crossing targets less than 4% of the time per 100 rounds fired. For a typical B-17 engagement lasting around 10 seconds, that meant about 130 rounds were discharged, yet perhaps only 5 of them connected with the enemy plane. Not nearly enough to down a fighter capable of taking dozens of 50 caliber rounds and remaining airborne, executing maneuvers that defied human reflex. The human toll was catastrophic. In 1943 alone, this 8th Air Force lost an average of 188 bombers per month. That was nearly 2,000 men vanishing every 30 days. Pilots, navigators, gunners, and bombardiers whose lives ended far from home. Their sacrifices a silent testimony to the ferocity of modern aerial warfare. So many of these losses were not the result of enemy firepower alone, but of something more subtle and insidious. The inability of human hands and eyes to translate speed and distance into effective fire. Courage could not overcome physics. When Eddie aimed directly at the enemy, he was already behind the target's motion. A Zero moving at 300 miles per hour crossed 440 feet per second. At 300 yards, that was 900 feet. The Browning M2's bullets took 0.31 seconds to reach the target. In that fraction of time, the Zero had surged another 136 feet ahead. Eddie's rounds struck the space the plane had just vacated. A cruel misalignment of human perception and mechanical reality. This phenomenon, known as deflection error, became one of the deadliest factors for bomber crews. Instructors understood the principle theoretically, but translating it into combat was another matter entirely. To hit a target crossing at 300 yards, a gunner needed to aim 15 to 20 feet ahead, essentially firing into empty air and trusting that the plane would fly into the bullets. Instinct, honed by millennia of reflexes, rebelled against this logic. Training programs such as the one in Laredo, Texas, attempted to teach the concept through simulators, moving targets and towing aircraft across open ranges. But the results were disappointing. The necessary calculations changed with every encounter: speed, distance, altitude, climb, dive, and gunners had mere seconds to react while freezing in oxygen masks and facing the constant threat of anti-aircraft fire. Fear often unraveled their discipline. Gun camera footage documented gunners who began by aiming ahead, but after repeated misses, instinct took over, pulling their aim backward until they were firing directly at the plane, precisely the wrong approach. In October 1943, during the Shrine Fort missions, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers out of 291 deployed. Returning crews were exhausted, angry, and utterly helpless. Something had to change, yet the solution had already been outlined almost 20 years earlier, buried in the dusty archives of military research. In 1924, Lieutenant Colonel James Puckle, an artillery officer and veteran of World War I, had published The Problem of Lead in Aerial Gunnery. He observed that as aircraft speeds climbed past 150 mph, the angles of deflection required exceeded the capacity of human intuition. By 250 mph, gunners needed to lead by 4 to 5 aircraft lengths for crossing targets. His tables were meticulous. At 200 yards and 300 mph, aim 47 feet ahead. At 400 yards, 94 feet, Puckle warned that without mechanical assistance, future aerial gunners would become nearly useless. His paper was filed and forgotten. Through the 1930s, aviation technology surged forward, while gunnery instructions stagnated, rooted in outdated World War I habits. Breath control and discipline worked well against stationary targets, but modern combat demanded more. The Army assumed marksmanship alone would suffice. It did not. By 1941, America's gunnery program was catastrophically behind the times. Students fired barely 1,000 rounds in their entire training, mostly at slow-moving or static targets. By mid-1942, losses escalated, and officers, desperate for solutions, combed through archives. Captain Robert Williams rediscovered Puckle's paper and realized the calculations were still correct. The mounting casualties provided irrefutable proof. Puckle had been right, yet one problem remained. Humans could not perform these complex calculations in the heat of battle. If mathematics failed under the stress of combat, could instinct bridge the gap? Across the Atlantic, the Royal Air Force faced the same dilemma. In 1940, Squadron 609, flying Spitfires during the Battle of Britain, discovered their hit rate against crossing German fighters hovered around 6%. Speed and bravery alone were not enough. Almost every shot missed. Squadron leader Horace Darley, himself a former clay pigeon shooter, decided to experiment. Shotgun shooters relied on instinct rather than calculation, so he hypothesized that pilots might achieve better results the same way. He grounded his pilots for 3 days in August 1940, mid-Battle of Britain, and instructed them to fire at towed banners without attempting precise calculation. Move while shooting. Don't steady your aim. Let the body's motion create the lead. The first attempts were disastrous. Bullets missed by as much as 50 feet. But after roughly 40 practice passes, accuracy gradually improved. First 8%, then 12%. That increase doubled the number of kills. Darley noticed the best progress came from pilots who stopped consciously thinking, who trusted instinct. The conscious mind was too slow. The subconscious could process motion faster than any equation. Fighter command spread the practice quietly. Some squadrons embraced it. Others dismissed it as unscientific. By 1941, results proved its effectiveness, and instinctive deflection became an unofficial standard. U.S. observers took note. Yet American bomber gunners couldn't maneuver like agile Spitfires. They required mechanical solutions. Enter MIT's radiation laboratory in 1942. Dr. Charles Stark Draper, a gyroscope expert, led Division 7, developing secret fire control systems. Draper realized gunners didn't need to see where the target was, only where it would be when their bullets arrived. The result? The Mark 14 computing gun sight, a 28-pound gyroscope-driven marvel using gears, cams, and analog computation to predict deflection in real time. Gunners set the target's wingspan on a dial, tracked it for 2 seconds, and a glowing reticle appeared ahead of the aircraft, indicating where to fire. Updating 30 times per second, the sight did in metal what the human brain could not perform in minutes. Tests in August 1943 were extraordinary. Hit rates soared from 5% to 18% on the first day, exceeding 25% after a week. Production lagged, however, and only newly built bombers received the Mark 14, leaving thousands of crews relying on iron sights. A field-ready solution appeared in the Pacific. Early 1944, Staff Sergeant William Bill Fleming, a veteran waist gunner aboard the USS Lexington, had survived 4 shoot-downs and flown 31 missions. In a small notebook, he sketched enemy aircraft with lines showing exactly where he aimed to score hits. Measured in plane lengths, 2, 3, sometimes more, Fleming showed his notebook to Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, the Navy's famed ace. O'Hare immediately recognized the value of empirical combat data and ordered Fleming to teach his method fleet-wide. Fleming's system was simple. During drills, a sailor walked a model plane across the deck while gunners practiced aiming ahead by 1, 2, or 3 plane lengths depending on angle. No math, just a visual rule. Count plane lengths and fire. Testing aboard the Lexington in March 1944 more than doubled hit rates from 4.2 to 9.1 hits per 100 rounds. Within weeks, other carriers adopted it. By May, spot shooting became standard on the Essex, Enterprise, and Bunker Hill. The method's power was as psychological as it was practical. Instructing gunners to lead by 50 feet meant nothing. They couldn't visualize such distances at 300 yards. 2 plane lengths gave them a tangible, immediate reference. The Army Air Forces adopted a similar technique, calling it radius of action shooting. Manuals illustrated lead using target wingspans. By mid-1944, training bases in England had overhauled programs, and bomber losses fell from 5.2% in late 1943 to 3.4%. Hundreds of crews were saved. Knowledge alone wasn't enough. Combat psychologists studying returning gunners observed a recurring issue: threat fixation collapse. Under extreme stress, even trained gunners reverted to aiming directly at the enemy. The closer the fighter approached, the faster their discipline eroded. Only relentless repetition could counter this, until correct deflection became automatic, bypassing conscious thought. By late 1944, with Allied air superiority established, training programs expanded. Courses once lasting 4 weeks ran 10. Trainees fired 5,000 rounds, 5 times more than in 1942, mostly at fast-moving targets. At the Naval Air Gunner School in Jacksonville, motorized turrets and high-speed boats towing targets provided 50 to 70 live passes daily. Instructors spoke sparingly. Students learned through immediate feedback, observing traces, adjusting and firing again. Subconscious mastery emerged. Veteran gunners with 30 missions exhibited remarkable precision. Even as enemy fighters hurled toward them, their aim remained ahead of the target. They had achieved the Japanese concept of mushin no mind, where skill flows instinctively, yet full mastery required time and ammunition rarely available in wartime. Most crews never reached it completely. Some formations of seasoned veterans repelled swarms of German fighters. Others, filled with novices, fell apart within minutes. Luftwaffe pilots learned to identify hesitant formations and strike first. The transition from desperate misses to precise deflection became one of World War II's quiet triumphs. Hit rates rose from 4% to over 20% by 1944, not due to new guns, but because humans learned to perceive and act differently. The Mark 14 evolved into the Mark 18, and later into digital fire control systems used in Korea and Vietnam. Jet-age systems, like the F-4 Phantom's lead computing site, achieved in microseconds what Draper's mechanical gears had accomplished. Modern missiles, such as the AIM-120 AMRAAM, continue this principle. Constant deflection calculation updated thousands of times per second. Today, Eddie Kowalski's lesson is automated and perfected. The Navy's Phalanx CIWS fires 4,500 rounds per minute, predicting where an incoming missile will be rather than where it is. Even video games teach the same truth. Players of War Thunder or Digital Combat Simulator quickly learn that aiming directly at moving targets fails repeatedly. They must lead shots, as 1943 gunners did, until instinct assumes control. By war's end, deflection shooting had fundamentally transformed aerial combat. Thousands of airmen survived because they performed something profoundly unnatural, aiming at empty sky and trusting physics over perception. It was both a technical and psychological breakthrough. Humanity had rewired instinct itself. The story of Eddie Kowalski and thousands like him extends beyond gunnery. It is about adaptation under pressure, about training the mind to perceive reality as it is, rather than how it feels. Survival hinges on a single immutable truth. When instinct says aim at what you see, aim instead where it will be.